Does your website rank on readability? Readability, wow. You know, when you first signed on to become a piano teacher or a voice teacher, creating a website probably wasn't a job that you thought you were signing up for. However, we know that websites nowadays are par for the course and everybody needs one. So, while you're spending a lot of time creating your website, one of the best ways that you can up the readability score of your website so that users can find it more friendly is to look at how you are formatting your text. And this is something that I've worked on with lots of clients over the years. And I thought, you know what? It's time to talk about this. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at 5 different ways that you can up your readability score so that when somebody lands on your website, they are less likely to bounce. And when I say bounce, that means leave. So we want them to read the important things, to be able to scan things quickly and get what you are about, who you serve. So we're going to be looking at 5 tips today that will help you up your readability score so that people don't bounce from your website. So if you are joining me live, please be sure to say hello and let me know where you are tuning in from. If you're watching on the replay, know that I love to come back and have conversations with you. So let's get to it, y'all. We're talking readability today. Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. My name is Sara Campbell, and I am a business strategist, mindset, and marketing coach for online studio owners and music studio owners just like you. And if you want to up your website readability, well, then you are in the right place. So this is something that we don't often consider when we're constructing a website. We're more concerned about with, okay, what pictures do I choose? What words do I choose? And where do I put those things? And well, readability is really important. So let's just define what we mean by readability first. If I can get through this broadcast and say that word like 100 times, we'll be good. Let's define what readability means. And I actually printed out a definition for you all, so I'm going to read it. So readability is basically a measure of how easy it is for people to recognize words, sentences, and paragraphs. So considering how quickly people make their way through websites nowadays, like they're just glancing, right? You've got about, they say, 7 seconds to capture the reader's attention and to really communicate what you are about. So readability is a crucial factor in how long people spend on your website and if they will even attempt to read what you have to say. So let's think of some examples here. So you guys go to websites every single day. Have you ever made it to a website where it was just like, oh man, this is hard to read. There's too much text. It's too small. I'm finding like it's hard to scan and find the information that I'm looking for. If you've ever made it across a website like that, let me know below in the comments. Say, yeah, and I experience this all the time when I'm looking at client websites and I'm thinking about, okay, what are some of the improvements that we could make, simple, tiny changes. And a lot of those improvements have to do with the readability score. Is it easy for me to look at your website and understand who you are, who you serve, and like what kind of things you do to help the clients that you help. So readability, reading on screens is actually harder than reading on paper. And so because of that, this is kind of interesting. Different studies have found that people actually read slower, less accurately, and they remember less of what they read when it's presented on a screen. So by some estimates, they say that website readers only read about 25% of your text. So this is why it's important for us to really consider these 5 elements today when we are looking at our website and thinking, okay, is this readable or is it overwhelming and are people going to leave before they even get to the good stuff? Because I know you guys have good stuff on your websites. So let's make it easy for that stuff to be read. I see Hey there, Karen. Hey, Rebecca. Nice to see you, Christine. So if you're here and you are ready to up your readability, I've got some good stuff for you today. As always, we love to learn out loud. So if you find something that is valuable to you and you want to share it with the world, give us your hashtag takeaway and tell us what that value is. Tell us what you're going to implement from these tips today. And for those who are watching on Facebook, I have a really cool thing set up for you. So if you drop the word read down below, I'm going to be able to send you the show notes from today. And for the YouTubers, I've got you covered as well. So let me pop on into the chat, and I'm going to give you a link that you can click here to get those show notes as well. And I'll make sure to repeat that at the end of the broadcast. So let me grab my link. All good stuff. Hey there, Sally. Nice to see you. And Deidre and Deborah is here. Awesome. We got lots of good people tuning in today. So let me make sure that I give this link to all of our YouTubers. For those who are on the tube with us, you can click this link below. I'm putting it into the chat. If you click that link, it's going to allow you to get the show notes from today. And it's also going to allow you to sign up for notifications if you would like to receive the links to these live broadcasts via text, which is kind of convenient. All right, so let's get started here. Let's get started with the first tip. Are you guys ready? This is a good one. So I've basically gone through what readability is, but for those who are just tuning in now, in a nutshell, readability is the score of how easy it is for people to recognize words, sentences, and paragraphs on your website. And because we read rather quickly and sloppily when it comes to screens, it's really important that your readability on your website is clear, because otherwise people are going to be missing the good stuff. So the 5 tips that we're going through today are going to hopefully increase the likelihood that people will stay on your website and they'll actually get a hold of the good stuff. So we're going to go through those in just a second. Give me a moment here. I see lots of people putting the word read down below. Julie says it's so easy to create a website and just leave it, but she says she wants to go back periodically to see if anything needs updated. And Deborah says, I love the reminders that you're going live. Thank you. You're welcome. The Savvy Sara bot handles that all. You know, she's got you guys covered. So let's get to tip number 1. We're going to be actually using some examples here today. So I'm going to move myself over. This is awkward, I know, but this was the best way that I could find to do this. So, all right, our first tip here today is that we need to break up the paragraphs. And this is something that it's one of the easiest things to do. You know, think back to grammar school when you were being taught to write a short essay. And we had learned, like, okay, so for each paragraph, we need a topic sentence, and then we need some supporting sentences, and then we need a concluding sentence. And so that meant that we probably had paragraphs that were about, 5 to 7 sentences long. Now, when it comes to paragraphs on the internet, we actually want them to be much shorter. So one of the rule of thumb that I talk about when I'm helping a client edit website copy is to look at, all right, you've got a paragraph, it's got like 9 sentences in it. It's a big old blob. And if you want people to get the important parts, let's break this up. Yeah, Rebecca says, I love me some bullet points. Hey, we're going to get to that, I promise. So let's look at a couple of examples here. All right, so I've created some examples of websites. Let me move this up a little bit. So here's an example of what a website might look like with a welcome paragraph. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of text. It's a lot. Now, you might have some really good information inside of that paragraph, but if people are scanning, which they are, they're probably going to miss some of the important points. So look at what happens when I switch up the paragraphs by breaking them down. Now, I know that this is just like your typical Latin placeholder text, but let's imagine that each one of these paragraphs starts with something that's rather important. And so you can take those paragraphs that you've written on your website and break them up. I typically say that I like to have 2 maximum of 3 lines in a paragraph, especially when it's a full screen paragraph. And we're going to get into some other tips about how we can break things down to make it even more reader friendly. But if we're going from something like this to this, already we can see this is a lot easier on the eyes. And that's what we're going for. We want it to be easy on the eyes, and we want people to be able to scan things and get to the important points. So that's tip number 1. Break up those paragraphs. Make it easy for people to kind of scan and look at the important points. So if you are thinking, all right, my website's got some long paragraphs, it's time to break them down, let us know below. So that's tip number 1. Super simple, right? Let's look at tip number 2. Tip number 2, and this is what Rebecca said, use bulleted and numbered lists. So let's say, for instance, on one of your pages that's about your lessons, you have a list of things that are included in lessons. So you could have that in a paragraph form. However, since people are scanning, they might not read all of those things, so they might not understand all the goodness that comes with your lessons. But if you can put bullet points on that page rather than a long list of things, they're more likely to see all of the important stuff. It's easy stuff that we often forget, right? This is simple stuff that we don't consider when we're putting things together. So if there is something in your website that could be put into a bulleted list or a numbered list, then this is a great way to up the readability score. And side note, this is a really good way to up the readability of your emails as well. So if you are sending out long emails that have a lot of important information in them, consider taking those paragraphs that have lists in them and breaking them down. So that is item number 2. Super simple. If you are with me and you're going to implement either 1 or 2, let us know. And let's move on to number 3. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so number 3 here. Ooh, I hear some cats breaking stuff downstairs. Pete says, yay, bullets, pew, 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 right? Okay, so it's easy. It's easy to implement these things. It's not rocket science when it comes to formatting. It's just stuff that we don't often consider. So I thought this would be really, really easy. Julie says she was just thinking that information can also be used for emails and blogs. Absolutely. So all of these formatting things, anything that's going to be read on a screen, we can use these tips to increase the likelihood that clients or prospective clients are going to be getting a hold of the good information. So number 3 here, choose your fonts wisely. Now, everybody loves a good fancy font. I know I love a good fancy font. However, we need to be careful in the way that we are using those fonts. So if you've got some fonts that aren't working quite well, let's take a look at what happens when we use fancy fonts in the place that we might need to use something that's a little less fancy. And I just want to pause and say, hey there to the YouTubers who are tuning in. If you're tuning in on YouTube, let me know. I'm so glad that you're here. This is the third week that we've been doing the live broadcasts on YouTube, and I'm so excited to welcome you guys into the fold. We've got lots of good stuff. Oh, and side note right now, be sure to subscribe. So whether you're watching on the Book of Face or YouTube, know that there's going to be new content coming out on the YouTube channel soon. So make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can get new content. It's going to be fancy content that we don't have on the Book of Face. All right, so we're going to choose our fonts wisely. Let's look at an example of this. Here's an example of how not to use a font, even though that font that you've chosen might be close to your heart and you think it's super cute. This is very hard to read. I love Rock Salt font. It's gorgeous. However, it's really hard to read paragraphs in this font. So what happens when we consider font usage is that we really want to lean into using fonts that are sans serif. A sans serif font refers to a type of font. So a serif font, an easy serif font that everybody recognizes is Times New Roman, right? Times New Roman has those little fancy feet that happen on the edges and sides of the fonts. On web, and serif fonts are great for printed material. That's why most of the books that you read are serif font books. However, on the screen, it's easier on the eyes to use a sans serif. So it means a font that's plain. So the example here that says about the lessons, that's a sans serif font. Now look at what happens when we flip the different fonts that we're using here. So instead of using the fancy font in the paragraph, I'm going to use the fancy font as my header. So fancy fonts on headers are great because they're attention grabbing and they look nice. And it's so much easier now to read those paragraphs because we put them into a sans serif font. So much easier. Okay, I see. Oh, we got somebody over on the YouTube. Hey there, nice to see you. I am up right now. I am up to teaching some cool stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. All right. So I'd love to know what types of fonts you're using on your website. One of the things that I like to encourage people to do is to pick out a fancy font for the headers and then pick out something that's really plain for all of your paragraph font. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a fancy font for your header. It is completely okay to have a font like that. So we have I believe this is, which font did I choose here? These are my regular fonts. So I have Poppins as my sans serif font for paragraph, and this is Josephine Sans as the header. So it's a nice bold font that has a lot of different options in it. So those are our tips so far. We've got making sure that we are splitting up our paragraphs and making them scannable. So, rule of thumb is like 2 to 3 lines of text per paragraph if you are going full width. Now, if you're going to do like a half width, I'm going to show you in a minute here, you might be able to have more lines. So we've got the paragraph splitting up. We've got bullet points and numbered lists in order to make it easier for read. And we've got font choices to consider. Then, all right, let's go to number 4. This is super important because I see this mistake on websites all the time, and I could never quite put my thumb on what was it that made this website hard to read until I did some research last week and I found out why. Alignment is super important on your website. So there's all different types of alignment that we can choose. We have left justified, we have left aligned, right aligned, we have justified, and we have centered. Now, centered text can be cool on graphics that are small and don't have a lot of text, or for things like headers. However, check this out. So I have an example here where I have that same 2 identical paragraphs. One of them is centered font and one of them is left aligned. Now, left aligned is the gold standard for almost anything. If you look at a book, it's probably left aligned. It might be justified. However, centered fonts are often found on websites and they're really hard to read. And here's why. Look at the little red lines that are on the side. When I reach the end of a line on centered text, my eye then has to search for the beginning of the next line because it's not in a line going down. So that can lead to my cat found a piece of plastic and he's now dragging it around the room. The lovely Bjorn. You can't see him now. Anyway. All right. So everybody say hi to Bjorn. He's the one making the racket in the background. All right. So the centered text, while it can be great for graphics and headers, once you put that into a paragraph form, you're asking a lot of your readers because their eyes are getting fatigued as they're trying to find the beginning of the line. So they are more likely to scan that paragraph and read much less of the text. Whereas if you have it left aligned, it's much easier for them to read. And hey, I have been guilty, we'll put this hand up, I have been guilty of using centered font on my website, but now I've looked at everything and like, yeah, it's actually a lot easier to read if I do a left alignment than a centered alignment. So if you have text on your on your website that is center aligned, I encourage you to take that paragraph, left align it, and you can keep the centered text on your headers, you can keep the centered text on your graphics, but just be aware that if it's a long paragraph and you're asking people to read a lot, then you're probably going to want to make sure that that's left aligned and they're going to be less likely to bounce halfway through the paragraph. All right, let's keep going here. We have one more tip for today. If you all are with me, let me know. Okay, I see another comment here. I don't have a website, but I love learning about this kind of stuff because you can use it for just about anything. That's 100% true, right? We've mentioned this a little earlier. We can use these readability rules on websites. We can use them on blogs. We can use them on emails. We can use them on printouts that we're sending home. So there's all kinds of uses for these. And it's just, building awareness into what's going to be easiest to read. All right, number 5 is line length matters. Now, this is a rule that I am learning myself, and I'm going to start implementing it a little bit more on my website. Line length. All right, so I found this really fascinating. Typically we're used to reading full length lines in a book. Now, but most books are, this big, maybe smaller. And so we don't have to work hard to go from line to line. But on a screen, especially if it's a large screen, then line length matters. So I think this particular tip deals more with desktop views of your website or your blog, whereas the mobile view is most likely at this point, you've got a responsive mobile view, so it's automatically making it smaller for your screen. However, on that big screen, line length can actually, if you have lines that are too long, then people may stop reading halfway through. So let's take a look at an example of this. So here's an example of full length lines. So the characters, I actually counted the characters on this and I wrote it down. In this, we have 126 characters on that first line. That's a lot. Now, the things that I read through probably 5 different blogs to put this together the other week. And what I've read on this is that the maximum number of characters that we want to put per line is between 40 and 70. Now, we've definitely, gone over this on this line because we have 126 characters. And to be honest, this is something that I'm going to be fixing on my website. So I'm going to be working with the margins to bring the margins in so that I don't have longer lines. Look at what happens readability-wise when we switch the line length. Now, one of the easy ways that we can do this is by kind of cutting things up a little bit with graphics. And then another way to do that would be to consider the margins of your page. Instead of having your text all the way out to the end of each side of the screen, then you would bring margins in that's going to squeeze the text into the center a little bit. So we can see this is much easier to read than the line length that had 126 characters. This one is down to 63. So we've halved it. And it was really easy to do because we just put a little image inside of that. Or like I mentioned, one of the other things that you can do is you can make your margins wider on both sides of the screen. So those are the 5 tips. Let's go through let's answer some questions here if anyone has questions about readability. Christine has a question here. Is center alignment okay if you want something to stand out? So Christine, depends on the length of that line. So if it's center alignment and you've got more than 2 lines of text, I would say maybe either cut down that text, edit it down, or shift that into a left aligned paragraph. So it all has to do with how much text are you putting in that centered area? Look at, coming back to that example that I had. Let me bring this up. Oops, that's not what I want. Here we go. If that top line, okay, so the top section here, let's say, for instance, that it only had 2 lines of text. They were rather short, right? If it only had 2 lines of text and they were short and we wanted to emphasize something, we might make that font a little larger. We might make it bold, and that way it will stand out and it's easier for somebody to read. If it's a full paragraph, then we'd probably want to put that into a left-aligned paragraph. And if we wanted to emphasize some of that text, maybe above that paragraph, maybe take a little excerpt from that, like a title or something like that, to make it easy to scan. So the point of all of these tips is to create more white space on your site, empty space, so that it gives like buffers between sections. And so that people, because we know they are like scanning instead of actually reading, they're only reading about 25% of what you have to say. They're able to immediately find what they want. So they may be searching for specific information, and we want to make this easy for them to do. There we go. Deidre says, great suggestions. I'm realigning my thinking. I like that. Okay. Elizabeth says, I have some editing to do. Homework for this week first. Yep. Branding bootcamp homework first. Then you can go to the website and do the aligning. All right. And I see some people dropping the word read below. As a reminder, if you drop the word read, I'm going to be sending you a couple of things, actually. I'm going to be sending you a summary of the tips here so that you have them all in one place. And then I'm also going to send you a blog that I wrote about SEO, since it also has to do with websites. So if you're interested in increasing the readability and searchability of your website, you can go to that link. For those who are on YouTube, if you click this link that I just put into the chat, I'll also include it in the description below. You'll be able to get a hold of that at first. All right. Oh, I see. Hey there, Aunt Cat. This is my Aunt Cat. Says, very helpful. Wish I hadn't missed the first 3 tips. Well, you're in luck because we're about to do a rapid recap here. So let's do our rapid recap and go through all of the good information. Here we go, guys. The goal of today is to increase the readability on your website. So I've got 5 tips for you that will make sure that people are getting the most out of the text that you put on your website, because we know that they are scanning, so they're looking for important information, so we don't want them to miss out on it. So here are 5 ways that you can do that. Here we go. Way number 1 is to break up your paragraphs. You want to make sure that these paragraphs are short and easy to read. Rule of thumb is that you want 2, maybe 3 lines of text inside of a paragraph, especially if it's full length. So a quick example of this, here is a little website mock-up that has these very long paragraphs versus the example here where I've taken the same text and just broken it up into smaller chunks. Break it up so that if they are scanning, they're going to catch the important sentences first. Number 2, you want to make sure that you use bullets and lists when possible. So instead of listing like a whole bunch of things that are inside of your online course or inside of your lessons, what you can do is use bullet points, and they're more likely to see the information that's important. So take those lists that are nested inside of paragraphs, break them up into bullet points or numbered lists so that they're easy to read. Number 3, choose your fonts wisely. I love a good fancy font, but fancy fonts are hard to read when they're in paragraph form. So here's an example of that. I love Rock Salt. I think it's a super cute font, but when it comes to readability, it's not so great. So instead of using fancy fonts inside of paragraphs, the best thing that you can do is use a sans serif font. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It's really easy to understand, and you can find all kinds of sans serif fonts used for website use. Look at how this, in this example, it looks totally different. I've used the fancy font in the header, 2 thumbs up for that, and I've used a sans serif font inside of the paragraph, which is now much, much, much easier to read. Okay, number 4, we're grooving along. Alignment is important. Center alignment can look fancy, but it can also be really hard on the eye, and here's why. If we look at these 2 examples, same exact paragraph, we can see those red lines moving around with the center text. When that happens, the eye has to jump to find the beginning of the line, and that actually causes eye fatigue. And so people are more likely to stop reading halfway through a paragraph if it's centered text. So instead of using centered text, go with the gold standard and use left aligned. The other option that you have is justified, but just make sure if you're using justified text that it's not stretching words out and making them look a little funky. All right, number 5 is line length. Line length matters. I know that we're used to reading full lengths of lines inside of books, but books are kind of small. And when people are reading on large screens, we need to consider that line length. So here's an example that has line length that goes the full width of the page. This first line has 126 characters in it, but the rule of thumb is that we want to stay between 40 to 70 characters. So one of the things that you can do in order to make that happen is you can include graphics on your website, or you could consider adjusting the margins of your website so that instead of having text go the entire length of the page, you bring some margins in and you have a little bit more white space on the sides, and then that character count goes way down. The character count on this one is only 63. All right, so those are the 5 tips here. If you found them useful, let me know. And remember that I have things set up for you so that you can get more tips about websites. So if you do want to get a hold of that, if you pop the word read down below, I will make sure to reach out to you via Facebook Messenger, and you can get a hold of all of the tips that I've discussed here today. And I'll also send you a little thing, a little blog I wrote about SEO and how you can tap into better SEO on your website, which is awesome because if we can format our text and get our text to be more readable, and we can tap into that good search engine optimization, not only are our sites going to be readable, but they're going to be searchable. And that's what I want for you, my friends. So thank you so much for being here today. I see we've got, yay, 1,000 hearts for the keytar. This is wonderful. Thank you, Sonia, for tuning in. I am so happy that you were here. If you found this to be valuable, let a teacher friend know about it. We do this every single week on Wednesday at noon Eastern time, and the replays are always available. So invite your friends to join us and let them up their readability on their website. So until next time, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Stay savvy and stay you, because there's no teacher in the world who's quite like you. And I think you are pretty dang awesome. We'll see you next week.